Good evening, everyone. This is Mel here from Sneakers Corner, and I'm happy to welcome back Odon, Lafontaine. Odon, welcome.
Good evening.
So we had Odon a number of weeks ago, and he did two different parts to do with the Quran. Perhaps you just like to give everyone a kind of a brief reminder of the two topics that you covered.
Yes, we called it a Nazarene reading of the Quran. We looked into the Quran for some specific words, the people of the book, the Nazarenes, the unbelievers, the kufars, kafirun, the mushrikun, the associationists. And by looking at every occurrence of those words and expression in the text, we realized that the standard Islamic narrative is false, that the people of the book are not the people of the scripture, meaning Jews or Christians or Muslims, but they are only the Jews. We realized that the mushrikun are not pagan polytheists, but they are Christians. We realized that the kafirun, the unbelievers, are the one who cover, meaning the coverers, meaning the rabbinic Jews who covered the Torah, who covered the sacred scriptures with the Talmuds. And this is a very important discovery because it gives a whole new sense to the Quranic text. It's not its new sense, it's its original sense. Its sense, which was hidden by the standard Islamic narrative. So we had two long presentations on this topic, and now we are about to have a third one, which will consist in exploiting the discoveries we made to understand the Quran.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so perhaps you can share your slides with us.
Of course.
And perhaps you can maybe refer to the conclusion of part 2, perhaps to begin with.
Yes. Let me have it in full screen. Here it is. Everything's okay? You're seeing it, Mel?
I am indeed, yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to the conclusion of the conclusion of the previous presentation. Here it is, the conclusion of part 2, the second part. We discovered that the Quran tells about a Jewish polemic between two currents of Judaism, Judeo-Nazarenism and Talmudic Rabbinism, in which the Arabs who listen to the preaching are dragged along. We discovered that the Quran tells about the existence of a forgotten Jewish group called Nazarene by the text. And we have the proof only with the Quran that this group existed. It is a group who defined itself as the right communities among the Jews, and we have all the Quranic reference to justify it. A group who recognized Jesus as the Messiah, a group who is rabbinical Jews and opposed to Christians, a group who held the Torah and the Gospel sacred and as the unaltered text of the Torah and the Gospel, who has the true faith, who believes in God and in the last day, the day is the last, who commanded the decent, forbid the blameworthy, and was humble towards God. And a group who established a covenant with some Arabs, taught them their faith, and urged them into something, a grand venture, and then this covenant was broken. And we will see now what this grand venture was.
Yeah.
So we established that the existence of the Quranic Nazarene can be made only by the Quran itself, apart from any other source. One could then form the hypothesis that those Nazarene might have something in common with other Nazarenes from the past, from sources older than the Quran, and this is the hypothesis that Edouard Marie Galès, my mentor, made in his thesis. And so we have subsequent questions, which we will try to answer now in the third part of the expose. What and why did the Quranic Nazarene teach the believers? We already saw a bit of this, but we will see the rest. What happened then? Why was the covenant broken? What was the covenant about? Why was the name erased from Muslim memories? Oh, and why was the standard written?
Yeah.
So this was to be continued here. And let's continue with the third part of the Nazarene reading of the Quran. At first, I want to tell you the tale of an ancient city. We'll see which city it is. It is a city which is the place where Abraham attempted his son's sacrifice. It is the place where he stood and prayed and circumambulated around an altar or a temple or a Kaaba. It is a place which was known to be the place of Abraham, the standing place of Abraham. It is a place of which exist clear signs describing all of this. It is a place which was the location of the first temple, the first house for the true believers. A place which was the place of worship and pilgrimage for the true believers. Here they prayed, they made sacrifice, and also they circumambulated 7 times around the house, the temple. A place which was the direction of prayer and the right tradition for the true believers. The place which was said to be the place of gathering and became grounds for a major city, maybe the mother of all cities. A city which fell to the rule of associationists, polytheists, who established their associationist religion there. Hence, the desecration of the place of the house of the temple and the image for the true believers. This sacred place of worship became forbidden. Now, if you listen to all of this, I think some lights are popping, and one begins to think, yeah, this is Mecca. This is exactly what the standard Islamic narrative is telling us about Mecca.
Yeah.
And because also in this place, there was some preaching made towards some Arabs to teach them the true religion as a reminder, to purify the temple, to reestablish the true pilgrimage, and to pray towards and at the sacred place of worship. Those who attempted this were at last expelled by the associationists, maybe by other believers, not very clear. It's a city which remains then to the end of associationists, who forbid it to the true believer, and hence they forbid them the pilgrimage. Several attempts were made to rule over the city, again, to get back to it, in order to re-establish the true religion there. Then a strong enough force was mustered so that the associationist ruler of the city had to open its door, and the true believers were able to seize the city without violence. And it is a city which temple was at last purified from any associationist influence and restored to the true religion. The true believers were able to come back and settle there. Sacrifices and pilgrimage were re-established. Also, this looks like Mecca. This looks exactly the Mecca of the standard Islamic narrative.
Yeah.
One might think so. But when you look at all of those assertions, every one of them points to Jerusalem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Every one of them is absolutely good with Jerusalem, a place where Abraham attended his son's sacrifice, and so on. And we will see that in the Quranic text, we can find evidence, even in plain sight, evidence for the fact that this ancient city is Jerusalem. And we will do so with the same method as we did during the previous presentation. We will look into the text, the Quranic text, for some very specific words an expression. We will look at every occurrences of them, and by doing so, we will be able to understand the real meaning of those words. The first are the Beit, temple, house, and the Masjid al-Haram, which are supposed to be the Kaaba, the Kaaba and the sacred mosque for the standard Islamic narrative. Second is the Maqam Ibrahim, the standing place of Abraham, which is supposed to. We look at the Hajj and the Umrah, the pilgrimage to Mecca and the small pilgrimage, the Qibla, the direction of prayer to Mecca, according to the standard Islamic narrative. We look at the concept of Ahid, the covenant in the text, and also at all those stories pertaining to the obstruction of the way of God to Mecca and the expulsion from Mecca. So, at first, let's look at the Beit and Masjid al-Haram. What is a Beit? A Beit in Arabic, it's supposed to be a house. And in the Quranic text, we find 65 occurrences of this word as pointing to a unique house of God, a kind of temple. We find, we find 17 occurrences of this word pointing to a unique house of God among the 65 occurrences in total in the Quranic text of the Beit word. It's a Semitic word. At first, we find it in Hebrew or Aramaic, which means also the house, a house, and which is used to designate temples for divinities, and temples for the one God, and so the temple of Jerusalem. When we see Beit, the word Beit without anything in an Aramaic or Hebrew text, 95% of the time points to the temple of Jerusalem. It can also mean the house of something. Yes?
Yeah, just in terms of the antiquity of the word Beit here, the letter B, from which alphabet comes from, is one and the same word, and the original shape was the outline of a plan of a house with an opening, and gradually that got turned over time and became the B that you have in Arabic. So that's the origin. There's a lot of history behind that significant word.
Very ancient Mesopotamian alphabets, I guess.
Yeah, I think it started with the Phoenicians and then gradually just spread out among all the Semitic languages. But I think the significant thing was that in ancient Iraq, they had a cuneiform method which carried this syllable sounds, which was a very complicated system because you had to know about 300 different characters. Whereas with the alphabet comes along and you could construct words from individual sounds, and it allowed a greater versatility. And it was a lot more efficient. But anyway, that's just a little bit of the background. Obviously, it's an important word, Beit.
It's a very, very important word and a very ancient one, as you just pointed it. We look also at the masjid. What is a masjid? There are 28 occurrences of the masjid word in the Quranic text, including 13 as masjid al-Haram. Masjid comes from the Arabic verb sajada, or the Aramaic sajid. It's kind of the same, which means to prostrate, to bow down. And so a masjid is a place where one prostrates or bows down. It is any place of prostration, of adoration, then, because you bow down before a divinity, before the one God, for example. It's a place of worship. And in a derived sense, it now designates a mosque. But during the 7th centuries, during the beginning, for example, of the 7th century, when Islam did not exist, there was no mosque. There was no Islamic mosque. There were only places of adoration, places of worship. And so when we look at the masjid word in the Quranic text, we should have in mind that it points to a place of worship and not an Islamic mosque with the garden, with the minaret, the towers, and so on. It is only a place of worship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Haram is a strange word because of the Masjid al-Haram, which everyone knows that today it designates Mecca, the great sanctuary of Mecca with the Kaaba. Because of this, everyone thinks it means sacred. But the first sense of haram is not sacred. Haram is the contrary of halal. It means forbidden, unlawful. From there, we can have a derived meaning, which means sacred because it is forbidden. But it's sacred in the ancient sense of the word sacred, the same sense as in taboo. A place is sacred because no one has the right to go there.
Yeah.
That's why it is sacred. And
Well,
this is the sense of the Masjid al-Haram.
Yeah.
Masjid al-Haram is a forbidden place of worship. No one has the right to go there.
There were inscriptions in the Temple Mount, which I think they found. I can't remember when they found them, but basically on the inscriptions it said that anyone who entered the Holy of Holy area would be under pain of death. It was only meant for Jews and so basically Gentiles were not allowed within a certain boundary. So
yes,
they
for example, yes.
So they could go into the court of the Gentiles. Yeah.
It was sacred in the ancient sense, but we find it in the Bible, I guess. It's not only inscription on the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
Isn't this in the maybe Leviticus?
It could be. Not sure. Absolutely.
So we have many occurrences of the Beit and Masjid al-Haram in the Quranic text. I've checked every one of them as Beit, as Masjid al-Haram. I won't comment here on every occurrence. It's too much of a lesson for this presentation. But we see in Surah 3, verse 96, indeed, the first temple, the first Beit, the first house set up for the people is the one of Bakah, blessed and a guidance for the worlds. Oh, this one, in Surah 2, verse 125, and when we made the temple a place of return for mankind and a place of security, and said, take the standing place of Abraham as a place of prayer, and we made a covenant with Abraham and Ishmael, and so on. We have other occurrences also in the Quran of the word Beit, which at first seems not to be pointing at a unique place of worship as the temple or the Kaaba, I don't know. We have in particular two occurrences of the expression al-Beit. In Surah 11, verse 73, Surah 33, verse 33. Al-Beit, meaning at first Abraham and his wife, and supposedly the wife of the prophet. This is a very strange expression, al-Beit, because like we explained, Beit is the house, the temple, but al comes from the word tent. Al-Kitab, as we explained before, are the people of the Kitab, because in the Arabic way of seeing things, they belong. So what is this with this expression? This is the tent of the house. You see, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with this expression.
Yeah.
It cannot be the house like in household, for example.
Yeah.
Like the house of the prophet. I think al-Beit means the people of the temple.
Yeah, yeah.
But we will keep this for later.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe another presentation, but keep this in mind.
Yeah.
As for the Masjid al-Haram, the forbidden place of worship, it is the direction of the prayer. So turn your face toward the forbidden place of worship, for example. And there were many things happening to this forbidden place of worship. This is where the pilgrimage and the Umrah is supposed to be done. For example, in Surah 2, verse 196, perform for God the pilgrimage, Hajj, and the Umrah. This is prescribed for him whose family does not live near the forbidden place of worship. And there were many events around this. There was some covenants, there was a pilgrimage, there was some sometimes where the believers try to, we see this in the Surah 48, they try to come back to this forbidden place of worship. We stole some animals which were prepared for sacrifice, for immolation, and they were hindered from going there. We will look at this in a moment. So now let's look at the place of Abraham. What is the place of Abraham? The Makam Ibrahim in the Quranic text. It is the place where Abraham stood. And this comes from the verb kama, to stand for, to defend, to stand before God, to stand firm, to stand in prayer. And mainly, there are tens, maybe not hundreds, but something like 50 or I think even more occurrences of the expression kama, which mostly point to the salat, the Islamic prayer, because we found everywhere standing in prayer, establish the prayer, which is the same word, establish hakimu, the prayer, which means perform the salat.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so the Makam Ibrahim is the place where Abraham stood in prayer, and the place where he stood kind of facing God. He stood before God, awaiting a sort of trial from God, awaiting God's judgment.
So standing solid in faith, I suppose, has that kind of sense.
Yes, exactly. And it can also help non-Muslim viewers to understand what it means to pray in the Islamic faith. When you are standing in prayer, you are kind of standing before God, standing firm before God, with a clear conscience, a purified body. This is the Islamic way.
I don't know if there's any overlap here, but in the Russian Orthodox tradition, there's a very strong emphasis of standing in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And services can last 2 or 3 hours, and it doesn't matter what age you are, you stand, there's no seats inside. And I believe up to a few centuries ago, that was true even in Western churches. There were no seats. There was a strong tradition of standing. So there's probably a lot to that
It's
notion.
also very ancient, because we have the same tradition in ancient Judaism. And there are also tradition of standing prayers in Judaism.
Yeah.
So this expression, Makam Ibrahim, is kind of rare in the Quranic text. The true occurrences of the expression Makam Ibrahim in Surah 2, verse 125, and we made the temple a place of return for mankind and a place of security, and said, take the standing place of Abraham as a place of prayer.
Again, I just wanted to point out also the antiquity of this idea. If you think about in many ancient traditions, standing stones were used in sacred places of worship. We think of places like Stonehenge, and it was connected with astronomy and so on. So there's a huge symbolism behind that. There's a huge tradition that it goes beyond even just Judaism. It goes back thousands of years.
It's in our human nature.
Yeah.
Something, yes. There are also another occurrence of Makam Ibrahim, the second one, which is in Surah 3, verse 96, 97. Surely the first temple laid down for the people was indeed that at Becca, as a blessed house and a guidance for the world. In it are clear signs. And what are those clear signs? The standing place of Abraham. Some other occurrences of the QWM root, Kaf, Waw, Mim, could point also to the place of Abraham. I've done the research in the text, but mainly we have two occurrences, those two occurrences. And in Surah 5, verse 97 and Surah 22, we can find some connection between the place of the sacred temple, the place of the temple, and the standing place. God instituted the Kaaba, the sacred temple, as a place of gathering, and gathering is a word based on the QWM root. It's a standing, in fact. It's not
Right,
really a gathering, as in we are gathering people. People stand there.
There's a little bit of an overlap between that word and ecclesia in Greek, the gathering, which is the word they used for church in the early days.
Yes, exactly. Ecclesia, and also in Aramaic, the word for ecclesia is an assembly. It's not an institution. It's not an organization. It's an assembly.
Yeah.
And in the Surah 22 also, we see a link between a place where one stands and the temple. In the standard Islamic narrative, the clear signs that the Surah 3 is talking about are supposed to be the foot imprints of the authentic foot imprints of Abraham, which are still to be seen today near the Kaaba in the Haram, in the sacred mosque of Mecca. There is a kind of construction, a steeple, or something like this. And in it, there is this relic of the authentic footprints of Abraham, which means he was standing there. And this is why it is this standing place. And this is why the Quran states that there are clear signs of Abraham's standing place. So it's kind of an odd relic because one could ask how someone might have left those footprints. Was Abraham a kind of dinosaur or something? No, it's very, very odd.
Yeah.
It's very odd.
They're taking a very literalist approach to the word as well.
Yes, it's a very literalist approach. It's kind of a concordism logic. We have to find something that fits the understanding we have of the Quranic text.
Yeah.
And luckily, we found something.
Yeah, yeah.
Which means the Quranic text is authentic and divine. But we will see that it is not the case. We will see at first that according to the Quran, the Bayt, the Masjid al-Haram, and the Maqam Ibrahim are all in the same place. They are not one and the same. They point at different realities: the temple, the place of adoration and worship, and the historic place where Abraham stood. And we see also that the expression in the Surah 3, verse 97, clear signs, can also be understood as clear verses. Ayatun bayinatun, clear signs. It is exactly the same words as clear verses. And in the Quran, there are many other occurrences of the same expression, ayatun bayinatun, in Surah 24, 26, 27, 28, which then designates clear verses.
Yeah.
And so we could understand Surah 3, verse 97, as being not about clear signs of the standing place, but clear verses of the standing place. And what verses could they be? Could they be?
So presumably these are verses from the Old Testament.
Verses from the Kitab, verses from the previous scriptures, because we do not find in the Quran those verses. And of course, we find the verses in the Torah, in the Kitab, as the Quran names it. In Genesis chapter 2, we see the story of Abraham sacrificing, attempting to sacrifice his second son, his only true son. And here we have clear verses of the standing place, because God in this this verse tells Abraham to go to the land of Moriah and on one of its mountain, and to perform the sacrifice there. And at verse 9, in Genesis chapter, there is a bit of a discrepancy on my presentation. It's Genesis chapter 22, verse 2, and then verse 9.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And verse 9, when they arrived at the place God had designated, Abraham built the altar for the sacrifice, and they went the wood, he bound his son Isaac, and placed him on the altar atop the wood. This is the place of Abraham according to the Bible, according to the Jewish tradition. And this is the one and only place that mankind has always known for Abraham, for the standing place of Abraham, before Islam.
Yeah.
Before Islam, there was only one standing place of Abraham. It was the site of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the Mount Moriah.
Yeah.
And no one knew about Mecca being the standing place of Abraham. So there's a kind of bizarrerie in the Quranic text, and it is all the more odd in the Quranic text. Also find mentions of the Jerusalem temple. About we find mention in. I don't remember the references. We find mention of Solomon, Suleiman, and Zachary as being, and also Mary as being in the temple. But it's not the same word which is used there. It's not the word bait, but it means that in the Quranic text, the preacher that we are preaching, they knew that the temple of Jerusalem was legit.
Yeah.
It was built on a right tradition.
Yeah.
So here there is a sort of contradiction in the standard Islamic narrative, because on one hand, it tells us that the real place of Abraham was in Mecca, but it also tells us about the real place of Abraham being in Jerusalem, because it is there that the temple was built, and this temple is mentioned in the Quran. The temple was built, the first temple was built by King Solomon. We found this in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 3, verse 1, first verse. Then Solomon began to build the temple, with the word Beit, of Yahweh in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where had appeared to his father, Yahweh, but it's not in the text. Appeared to be, this was the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So with those verses, we see that the standing place of Abraham has nothing to do with Mecca.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want a more detailed approach of this topic, I urge you to look at Paul's presentation on the Sneakers Corner channel.
Yeah.
He did a very thorough work study on this topic, and it is very clear with him that the Beit, the Masjid al-Haram, and the Maqam Ibrahim are in Jerusalem, and they have nothing to do with Mecca.
Yeah. I should point out to people that Paul Ellis will be starting a channel soon, so he'll be bringing us a lot more of his work.
He already has a website also.
Yeah,
with some very interesting stuff to be downloaded freely.
Yeah.
Now he will make wonders, I guess.
Yeah.
So then we will look at the Qibla. What is the Qibla? And what is this word? It's based on the Kaf Ba Lam QBL root, which means before. What is before? So the Qibla is what is before. It's not at the first sense the direction of prayer. It is what is before, meaning the tradition. So in a derived sense, the tradition concerning the prayer. In another derived sense, the direction of the prayer. We find this first meaning of the root in the Hebrew Kabbalah, which means the tradition from the ancestor, which has given the name, the Kabbalah, la Kabbale, like Kabbalah, in different languages. And hence, we understand that the word Qiblat that we find in the Quran, its first meaning is not the direction of prayer, it's the tradition. And it can be understood as a direction of prayer, but at first, it's a tradition.
That's amazing, actually, to see that connection between Qibla and Kabbalah. Kabbalah. Wow. It's incredible.
I think the Kabbalah, the Kabbalah is much younger than Islam. The Kabbalah appeared around the 10th or 11th century, something like this.
Yeah. But perhaps the word was there.
Well, the word, of course, the word is very ancient.
Yeah.
We find the Kabbalah word in the Bible.
Yeah.
Not meaning not pertaining to the book and the Kabbalah, but pertaining to
the sense of tradition.
The sense of tradition, exactly.
Yeah.
And if we want to understand also the concept of Qibla in the Quran, we also have to look at the occurrences of the verb turn, to turn oneself, to turn the face, because it can also mean, it can also point to a direction of prayer. And so I've done the every occurrences of the turning of oneself, of the face, thanks to wonderful tools that are now available to everyone, which are the websites corpus.quran.com, and Dan Brubaker's website, quran.getaway.com. Those are really fantastic tools to understand the Quran, because you can make you can research formulas. You can research several words in the Quran. We can search an expression and find every occurrence of the expression in the text. It's very, very useful for this kind of work. And so, thanks to this, yes.
I was just going to say that it's interesting that there's an interesting parallel with the Greek word metanoia, which is a word which means to turn around, but has a sense of repentance. So there's a lot of interesting parallels there across the languages with the idea of turning in different direction, tradition, turning from one's old life to a new life,
Like the same in French and in English with conversion.
Yeah.
The conversion is when one makes a U-turn.
Yeah.
This is the conversion. It's turning completely.
Yeah.
So the Qibla and the turning, we have many occurrences of those expressions in the Quranic text, and I won't comment on them. It's here on the screen. I will also add that the PDF file of my presentation will be available for download. I think, Mel, we will make something with your channel.
Yeah.
I have a website, which is thegreatsecretofislam.com.
Yeah. So I'll upload it onto my channel's website, and it'll be on yours as well. So multiple ways to get this,
Now, it could be very useful to look at every occurrence, but clearly we don't have time to do this now.
Yeah.
But we will look at some of them, because we will. It is very useful to understand what was the direction of the Qibla. What was it? We see that there was a first Qibla. According to the standard Islamic narrative, it was supposed to be Jerusalem. And then came some revelations to the Prophet Muhammad, and he changed the Qibla from Jerusalem to Mecca. But when we look in the Quranic text, the first Qibla is not at all described as being Jerusalem. It is described as something between the east, the sunrise, and the sunset. Maghrib, Mashrek. And it's not Jerusalem at all. It has something to do with the sunrise or the sunset. There is another occurrence of this.
If I can jump in and just make a reference to A.J. Juice's point on this, which is that the Pharisees had a tradition of facing towards the sunset, and the Sadducees in the 7th century had a tradition of praying towards the east. So this might fit in with what you're saying.
It might be, it might fit, but I think the best fit is the Christian tradition. Mm-hmm. There are two other occurrences of the Qibla, or the turning of your face, pointing to the first direction of prayer. And in all of those three occurrences, we see it has something to do with the sunrise and the sunset, or something in line with the sunrise and the sunset. But it has nothing to do with Jerusalem. And there we understand that the first Qibla was the sunrise.
Yeah.
And this was the tradition of Christians. First Christians, they built their churches according to the direction of the sunrise. There was a strong symbolism there. Rise was the image of the resurrection of Jesus. And I was told by Edouard Marie Galès that the Christians were the first to introduce a direction of prayer. And he told me that the Jews introduced a direction of prayer towards Jerusalem, and maybe the Sadducean toward the east, toward the sunrise, because they wanted to imitate the Christians.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's probably one of the rare instances where Jews have imitated Christians.
Maybe, yes. So, is this first Qibla a direction of prayer toward Jerusalem? I think not. The real question to be asked is who prayed according to a direction given by the sunrise and the sunset. So the first Christians, maybe the Sadducean, but I think the first Christians were much more influential. We saw during the previous presentation that the audience of the preaching, the audience is Christian. The audience is not polytheist or pagan. The associationists are Christians, and the audience is Christian.
Yeah.
And here we have three verses which reflect a predication, a preaching. We see a preacher preaching to some people, and this is all preaching. There are instructions there. So wherever you turn, so he is preaching to someone specific, an audience, a specific audience, and we have established already that this audience was Christian. So the first Qibla, the first direction of prayer that the Quran tells about is not Jerusalem. It's the sunrise. It's the Christian tradition. It's a Christian Qibla. And what about the second Qibla, the new Qibla, the one that is introduced by the preacher? The preacher in Surah 2, verse 144, tells his audience, turn your face toward the direction of the forbidden place of worship, the Masjid al-Haram, which is, now we have established it, which is Jerusalem and not Mecca. Turn your face toward Jerusalem, and wherever that you are, turn your face in its direction. And here we might have a problem. in the Quranic text, there are many verses condemning the Jews, condemning the unbelievers as being coverers, as being rabbinic Jews who covered the sacred scriptures. So how come, how could a preacher make his audience share the same tradition as Jews? And this is what we see here in his verse. He is trying to explain his audience that even if the people now turn towards Jerusalem, they won't be doing it because of Jewish reasons. They won't be Jews. Either the believers, either the Jews, they will have their own tradition, even if it points to the same place, Jerusalem.
Yes.
And indeed, those who were given the book, which means the Jews, the book is the Torah, surely know that it is the truth from the Lord. And God is not aware of what they do. So if you turn toward Jerusalem, you will do the same as the Jews, because the Jews know that it is the truth. But even if you come to those who are given the book, this is the following verse. So even if you come to the Jews with all the signs, ayatin, the verses, as we saw it previously. So even if you come to the Jews with all the verses, not they would follow your tradition, your Qibla. They will not pray toward Jerusalem because of your reasons, because of your verses. What are those verses? These are the verses of the coming back of Jesus in Jerusalem. During the ascension of Jesus, so he evades, he rises in the sky, and he disappears. There come two angels telling the apostles that he will come back as he just rose. So meaning he will come back on maybe on the Mount of Olives, or the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. So if you come to the Jews and tell them, I'm also praying towards Jerusalem because this is the place where Jesus will come back, they will not follow your tradition. This is what is explained here. This is what the preacher explains his audience. And not
just,
will you...
I just point out as well is in the story of the ascension, Jesus is taken up into the crowd, into the cloud. And this has the sense of the pillar of cloud with Moses. It has this sense of God's presence. As this would have had a huge significance.
Of course, this is the Christian way of looking at it. This is the biblical way of looking at it. But one could have a very literalist approach, and one could think that he will come back on the Mount of Olives because this is the place where he rose to the clouds. You see, you have an elaborate vision, a Christian face vision, which is the one who you just told us about. And you could also have a very literalist approach. And I think this literalist approach was the one of the Quranic Nazarene, the one they were teaching the believers, the Arabs. So here in this second verse, in this verse of Surah 2, verse 145, we have a sort of complicated, complex explanation from the preacher, explaining the believers that even if they pray toward Jerusalem as the Jews do, they don't do it for the same reasons. The Jews do it because of their tradition. The believers do it because of their tradition, their own traditions. If you look into the standard Islamic narrative, the explanation that the Muslim scholars try to give this verse is completely odd. It's unbelievable. This is supposed to be happening in Medina, where there are Jews, and the Jews are supposed to know that they should pray towards Mecca. What is this? This doesn't make sense at all. But here, with the reading, the Nazarene reading that we are having now, we understand what the text really means. And we understand why the standard Islamic narrative is so wrong.
Yeah.
So here we have a new Qibla. This is the direction of prayer towards Jerusalem, as the Jew already abided by it, already adopted it. But the believers did not adopt this new Qibla to become like them. This is what the text tells us. So now let's have a look at the Hajj and the Umrah. So Hajj, is, according to the standard Islamic narrative, the great pilgrimage to Mecca during the sacred months. And one can immediately see that there is something wrong with this word, because there is no logical connection between the meaning pilgrimage, great pilgrimage, and the Arabic etymology hajjiji, which means to argue. Pilgrimage is not something very linked to an argument or anything like this. Really, there's something strange. We see 11 occurrences of this route as Hajjah to perform the Hajj, 9 as the non-Hajj, plus 1 Hajj, and 1 occurrence of Haji, the pilgrim, which gives us a total of 12. As for the Umrah, it's also a very strange word. It's based on Ain Mimra. It's supposed to mean to visit a populated place. And in the standard Islamic narrative, it is the small pilgrimage to Mecca, the pilgrimage that the pilgrim perform outside of the sacred months. But here again, there is no logical connection to the Arabic etymology, Ain Amer, maintain or to build. This is very strange, very, very strange. And we will see in the text some consequences of this. So I've done the work like I've did for the other words. I've looked at every occurrence of Hajj and Umrah and of the roots Hajj, HGG, and Ain Amer. And I've also looked at all the occurrences of the circumambulation, which is the rite which is performed during the pilgrimage, going around the temple, going around the house. So nowadays at Mecca, but as we saw it, every time we read temple or forbidden place of worship in the Quran, we know now that it points to Jerusalem. So Hajj and Umrah might have been customs pertaining to Jerusalem. A Hajj might have been a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And what is the Umrah then? Well, we will see it. At first, let's have a look at what happens in Mecca. I guess the viewers of the channels already know that Safa and Marwa are mounts in the haram of the Mecca, just near the Kaaba. And this is where the pilgrims are supposed to make a kind of circumambulation according to the verse 158 of the second surah. Indeed, the Safa and the Marwa are from the symbols of God. So whoever performs the pilgrimage of the temple or performs Umrah, so no blame on him that he walks between them. And because of this, the pilgrims in Mecca do a kind of circumambulation between those two hills, but they are not really hills. There are some rock mounts, small rock mounts. Here is Safa, here is Marwa, and now the Saudis have built a kind of hallway to protect the pilgrim and to organize the circumambulation.
It's a bit like the Las Vegas version of the Eiffel Tower.
Kind of, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very it's like an amusement park nowadays.
Yeah.
This is what big money does. This is the Saudis. But the thing I want to point here is that those are supposed to be mountains or mountains, and are very, very, very small rocks. In fact, for a mount, it's very small.
They're just boulders, really.
Whereas in Jerusalem, we have mounts. We have the Mount of Olives, of course. I've already told you about. This is a satellite picture of Jerusalem. Here, for example, you can see the Temple Mount, which is now the Mosque Esplanade, what's the name of this place? We see here the Dome of the Rock. Here is Mosque Al-Aqsa. This is the old city of Jerusalem. Here we have the city of David. So the Mount of Olives. Here we have the old Jewish cemetery and the Mount of Olives. And we have the Mount Moriah, the famous Mount Moriah, the one we spoke about.
Sounds just like Mount Marwa.
This is exactly the same word. Moriah, Marwa, those are exactly the same word.
Yeah.
So this is the Temple Mount. This is the place of Abraham, the standing place of Abraham that we talk about. The biblical tradition tells us this is the place of Abraham. Mm-hmm. And we have also a Mount Safa in Jerusalem. It is not very known, but it should be well known now. This is Mount Scopus. Scopus in Latin or in Greek, Scopain. And in Hebrew, it is called Mount Safa.
Wow.
And we find it, for example, Josephus' Jewish Antiquities. So we have in Jerusalem a Mount Moriah and a Mount Safa. And what's between them? The Cedron Valley. The Cedron Valley, Nahal Kidron in Hebrew, is described by Prophet Joel in the Bible as being the valley of decision, the place where all nations will be gathered, the place of the apocalypse. So when we look at this, and when we look at the verse describing Safa and Marwa, we find a very different sense than the standard Islamic narrative has given to the Safa and Marwa circumambulation. What does it mean to be at Mount Scopus and to go to Mount Moriah, crossing the Cedron Valley? It means that the last days are coming. It means the apocalypse is about to begin. This is a very apocalyptical. Excuse me, you understand me.
This is ground zero for the apocalypse, so it's
ground zero for the apocalypse, exactly.
Yeah, so this you can't get more significant in terms of location, of course, and then it's associated with the ascension of Jesus and his return there as well in that vicinity. So it lines up very well indeed.
And we know that a very big part of the Quran, most of the little surahs are about the apocalypse, the day is the last, Yawm al-Din, the day of judgment.
Yeah.
The Quran is all about the end of times and the apocalypse and what will happen during the apocalypse.
Yeah. Stephen Shoemaker makes that point in his book, The Death of the
Death of a Prophet.
Death of a Prophet, yeah.
He talks about the establishing of the reign of God.
Yeah.
Amr Allah. A very, very, very important book. A very good book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, what can we tell about the Hajj and the Umrah? Are they what the standard Islamic narrative described? No, of course not. And the scholars have gotten it. Stephen Shoemaker, for example, and here I'm quoting Robert Kerr, which is a top-notch linguist. He knows all about those ancient languages, and he wrote a very important article, Aramaism in the Quran and their significance, where he studies something like 50 or 60 Aramaisms, words in the Quran that are based on the Aramaic. And he established that Hajj, the word Hajj and Umrah in Arabic, constitute borrowing from direct borrowing from Aramaic.
Yeah.
So we have to look at what Hajj and Umrah mean in Aramaic and in Hebrew in order to understand it. Hajj in Hebrew means to circle, to go around. This is the idea of circumambulation. For example, like the one Abraham did around the Temple Mount. And the word has taken the sense of feast, festivity, a religious festival at the Jerusalem Temple where there is a circumambulation. And Umrah comes from the Aramaic Umrah, excuse my Aramaic, which means to dwell or to lead a monastic life, which is a very, very, very strange word. And it is a very strange word also in the Quranic text, because the Quranic text, when you read it in its context, when you read the word Umrah and all the other words derived from the same Arabic root, Ain Mr, there is nothing really significant about a pilgrimage or a small pilgrimage. Everything points to an activity in the temple or around the temple. And I think it means a kind of devotion to the temple, a kind of service to the temple, even a consecration. One becomes a sort of soldier monk in the way of God. He adopts God's rule. He fights in the way of God. He consecrates himself to God and to something pertaining to the temple.
Could this perhaps be a reference maybe to the Levite Jews whose role were to offer sacrifice in the temple, something that was denied to them for centuries, and this would be
the Levites?
Key thing.
You mean the Kohanim? The priest who performed the sacrifice at the temple.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, they were the Kohanim, the Kohen family among the Kohen.
Oh yes, Koran. Yes,
the Levites. Yes.
Yeah, Koran.
That might be. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I will discuss this with Robert Kerr. He's the friend, and I think it's might be interesting in digging into it.
Because I think the Pharisees' side of things, they were mostly located at this time in Iraq, but I think the Sadducees' side of things and the Levites were more focused on that priestly duty, the offering of sacrifices. So that would have been a big thing for them. So perhaps between the two groups, they each had a different emphasis. Maybe the Pharisees were all about, the return to the temple, not necessarily the sacrifices, but maybe the other group were more into the sacrifice element of it.
I'm not an expert on Sadducees, but I always thought that they were almost all massacred by the Romans.
That's what I thought.
But first and second centuries, and there were maybe some few survivors, but they fled.
Yeah.
There is an hypothesis about them establishing in Crimea.
Crimea, is it?
You see, like in the Black Sea.
Crimea.
And there is this thing with the what's the name? I've forgotten it. It's in my book. It's The Great Secret of Islam.
Would it be? You don't mean the Black Sea? You mean the other place? It's at the tip of my tongue. It's by the sea of next to Iran.
No.
Hyrcania, no?
It used to be in Ukraine. There was a big turmoil about the Russian taking it back. No, it's
Crimea then. Yeah, it'd be Crimea.
Crimea. Yes.
Yeah.
There was an Israeli scholar, I guess, who wrote a book about the Sadducees establishing themselves in Crimea and becoming the leaders of the Khazar Empire. I don't know whether, Mel, you heard about this.
No, this is the first time I've heard this.
And the Khazar Empire is very strange. It's a huge empire in Central Europe, in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, and it became a Jewish empire.
Right, God,
very strange. It's a strange story about the leaders of this empire converting themselves to Judaism.
Yeah,
it's very strange.
Yeah,
and I don't remember the name of the author. I have the book here, but
I would say that A.J. Juice points out that the Sadducees had survived, and they followed a leader who was referred to as the Nasi, whereas the Pharisees followed the Exilarch in Iraq, in around Mahosa and forgotten the name of the place, Nahardia. Those two
and
places.
Thereafter Babylon.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Let's get back to Hajj and Umrah. So Hajj is a very Jewish word, a very common word. And for example, there are several Hajj in Jewish culture. There is the Hajj of Shavuot, the Christian Pentecost. It was the feast of the first fruits, the first harvest. Yeah. And it has became, in the biblical tradition, the feast of the giving of the law, the giving of the Torah. And during this feast, the Jews used to circumambulate around the Temple Mount, around the temple. And by doing so, they thought that they imitated Abraham, who during the first feast of the first fruits,
that's a tongue twister there.
The first fruits did the same. So it was before the giving of the Torah, of course. Yeah. But we see this in the book of Jubilees. Abraham was during this feast going around the altar 7 times.
Yeah.
And we find this tradition of going around the house, going around the temple, going around the Kaaba 7 times. We find it in the biblical tradition, in the Jewish tradition, and nowadays in the Islamic tradition.
Yeah, and I think this is probably worth pointing out that it's mistakenly considered to be an ancient pagan tradition, but actually we can see that it's a Jewish tradition that's been taken up.
Exactly, the Jewish tradition.
Yeah.
So once that we know that the Hajj and the Umrah had to be performed in Jerusalem, there comes the question, how can one perform the Hajj with a Christian rule over Jerusalem or another rule, a non-Nazarene rule? And this is the question, and this is what the Quran is about. The Quran is about a great project to take back Jerusalem, to perform the Hajj there, so the first Hajj, to go back to Jerusalem, and to trigger the apocalypse by doing so.
Yeah.
And this is explained in many topics, one being the covenant between God, Abraham, and Ishmael. The Quranic text tells us about a covenant not between Abraham and Ishmael, but between God, Abraham, and Ishmael. Mm-hmm. A covenant which was made to teach the way of and the religion of the Nazarene to the Arabs. So we saw this in the previous presentation, that the Arabs were taught about the Torah, the Qibla, the food laws, the prayer rites, and so. And we will see now that the main goal of this covenant is to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem and to trigger the apocalypse. And this is what we can gather from all those occurrences of those words that we looked into. In Surah 2, verse 125, God made a covenant Ahid, with Abraham and Ishmael. Both of you purify my temple. So my temple bait, we know that it's in Jerusalem now.
Yeah.
For the one who go around it, and the one who are devoted to it, and the ones who bow, and the ones who prostrate themselves. Here there is something to be said.
Can I just point out something? Actually, in Jewish tradition, the expectation was that when the Messiah returns, the temple would be purified. So this would fit in.
This is Ezekiel.
Yeah.
This is the prophet Ezekiel who told this.
Yeah.
And for the Christian, the temple is Jesus himself, and it's kind of transferred into every Christian. And so the purification of the temple is what the Christians do with themselves.
Yeah.
But for some Jews, and I think for most of them, they are still waiting for the temple to be rebuilt and purified. Yeah. But the point I was about to make here is the question of this Abraham and this Ishmael in this verse. What does it mean that they are supposed to purify the temple? We know that the temple was built by Solomon. It was not Ishmael nor Abraham, the temple in Jerusalem. So what is this? Are these the biblical figures, or are those images for something else? I think that Abraham is the image of the Nazarenes, the right descendant of Abraham, and Ishmael is the image of the Arabs. Yeah. And here we have the preacher developing an image for his covenant. He's trying to have his audience believe that God himself wants the Arabs to ally with the Nazarenes, the Arab being Ishmael, the Nazarenes, the Quranic Nazarenes being Abraham, in order to purify the temple of Jerusalem. And God will be there to honor this covenant, because God will make this land secure. This is what we see in the following verse. And moreover, in this very, very important verse, verse 127 of Surah 2, we will have an explanation of the covenant. The standard Islamic narrative has invented a very strange understanding of this verse. This is the one I wrote: when Abraham raised up the foundation of the temple and Ishmael with him. Then, literally. But the standard Islamic narrative has persuaded all the Muslims that this is the proof that the Kaaba in Mecca was built by the biblical Abraham and the biblical Ishmael. But when we really look into the text, we see there is something very, very strange, because the verb raised up is not conjugated. Its conjugation is not in the past tense. It's not the perfect tense as we as it exists in the Semitic languages and in Arabic in particular. Yeah. Its conjugation is in the future tense. It's Yarfa'u, will raise.
Yeah.
It's not. It's the imperfect tense, which means the action is to be done.
So
It
this
has not been done yet. It has to be done.
So this rules out any interpretation which suggests that Abraham built the Kaaba in Mecca all that time ago. It's something yet to be done. So
It has to be done. So
Yeah.
the real reading of this verse in the real Arabic language is, so Abraham will raise the temple from its foundation with the help of Ishmael. And this is a program. This is the master plan. This is what they want to do.
And this might fit in historically with the work of people like Umar, who went to the Temple Mount and tried to rebuild the temple.
This is what happened.
And
the temple was rebuilt around 638, 640.
Yeah.
We will see it in a moment. But I would add something about the standard Islamic narrative. The understanding that it has forced onto the Muslim minds is so deeply encased in those minds that even the Arabic-speaking Muslims cannot read this verse according to what it is written. They cannot read Yarfayu as will raise, even though it is evident, it is enormous.
Yeah.
There is another occurrence in the Quranic text of the exact same conjugation of the verb yarfa'u in another verse, and here the standard Islamic narrative says it is conjuged. The conjugation is in the future tense,
because that wasn't obviously a problem.
So here we have something very important, which is, I think, the core of the covenant between Abraham and Ishmael and God himself. The preacher tells its audience that God wants Abraham, which means the Nazarene, to raise the temple with the help of the Arabs. And what will happen then? This is what we see in an apocalyptical surah, the Surah 52, which describes the apocalypse by the mountain and a book written on parchment unrolled by the inhabited temple. Surely the punishment of your Lord is indeed going to fall on the day of the apocalypse, the judgment day, when, etc., etc. And here we have something very strange. The inhabited temple. We see that we know now that the temple, this temple is the temple of Jerusalem, so it is not the Kaaba. And inhabited, it is the same root as Umrah.
Yes.
It's Ain Mr. Here Al-Mamuri.
That monastic sense.
What does it mean exactly? The French scholar Régis Blacher, who made a translation into French of the Quran in the 1950s, and it is a very, very good translation because it is a scientific one.
Mm-hmm.
And he translated this as being by the serviced temple, meaning serviced by priests. And here we understand what the Umrah is about. The Umrah is about having the temple back into service.
Yes, yeah.
The temple filled with people in prayers, doing sacrifices, bowing down, prostrating themselves, and so on.
Yeah.
And what will happen when the temple will be serviced? This is what Surah 52 is about. Then the day the last will come. The punishment of your Lord is indeed going to fall. And here we have also a hint of what the program of the Nazarene was. They wanted to rebuild the temple and to service it, to have it serviced in order to trigger the apocalypse.
Wow.
And here it's in the Quran. Only in the Quran. But we also find some clues of this in the Islamic tradition. So this is a sort of excursus from the presentation, which should be only about the Quran, but I think it's very significant.
I think it's something for the audience really to take this point really to heart, that you can see how this all makes the Quran much more understandable now. You know, once you get the context back in order, it's such a simpler text to interpret.
This is something I would like to say in conclusion, but
Yeah,
I can say it right now. One always thinks that the Quran is very difficult to read and to understand. And of course, it is a difficult text, not mainly because its language, its Arabic language, is not that perfect.
Yeah.
There are lots of words missing, the conjugation are not good, and so on. But the meaning, the general meaning, can be understood. And the thing with the Quran is that we are polluted with the standard Islamic narrative, and we cannot fathom another understanding of the Quran than the standard Islamic narrative.
Yeah.
And because of this, we are sort of glued into this narrative, which is false.
Yeah, we have to get rid of that standard Islamic narrative if we have any hope of understanding it afresh.
And then when you start fresh, when you start something completely new, we will find that the Quran is understandable and is very understandable.
Yeah.
And it's kind of logic.
Yeah.
Even logic. It's everything fits.
Yeah.
All the pieces fit.
Yeah.
And this is a huge discovery. There is something underneath the standard Islamic narrative, hidden in the Quranic text, hidden in plain sight. And it's here for everyone to be read and understood. It's not that difficult. The main difficulty is to get rid of the concepts of the standard Islamic narrative, the concept of the prophet received a revelation from an angel in Mecca, in Hijaz. There is nothing about all of this in the literal text of the Quran.
Yeah. You know, that reminds me of the thing that a magician does, which is misdirection.
Misdirection, yes.
Look over here. You can't see what the magician is doing in their other hand because you're distracted by what they're doing with the other hand. And I think the standard Islamic narrative is basically an act of misdirection. And if you can stop looking in that direction and look at what's happening in front of you, you'll get it. You'll see what's really happening.
You'll see. Everything will fit.
Yeah.
Every time you read Temple or Masjid al-Haram, you read, this is Jerusalem. Every time you read Al-Kitab, no, it's not people of the book, it's Jews.
Yeah.
Every time you read Associationist, it's Christian.
Yeah.
And here the story becomes coherent.
Yeah.
And we see a whole different story. We see what really happened during the 7th century. We see that the Arabs and the Nazarene thought that the apocalypse was about to happen in Jerusalem. And there are still hints of this in the Islamic tradition. So I have to give credit there to Guillaume D, French scholar Guillaume D, who is teaching at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, ULB, who is a very top-notch scholar about the Quran, very advanced on its meaning.
Yeah.
And he discovered that Jerusalem was at the center of all attentions during the 7th century as the place of the apocalypse. And we still find it in some Muslim scholars from the 10th century, Ibn al-Muwajjah or Ibn al-Faqih. In their books, they talk about Jerusalem as the place of the apocalypse, and they put a great emphasis on the Temple Mount and the rock, which is the tip of the Temple Mount, which is nowadays encased in the Dome of the Rock. the rock of Jerusalem is one of the rock of paradise. We will find the Torah that God said to the rock of Jerusalem, "You are my lowest throne, and from you I ascended into heaven, and below you the earth is extended, and all the waters that flow from the top of the mountains come from below you." In Ibn al-Faqih, Jerusalem is a land which God has chosen from among the other lands. Whoever chooses to die in Jerusalem dies as if he died in heaven. The rock is the navel of the world. God will destroy Gog and Magog in Jerusalem. Very important. The gathering and resurrection of the dead will take place in Jerusalem. So this is not in the Quran, of course. This is in the Islamic tradition, but just gives you what the first Muslims or the proto-Muslims or the Muslim believers from the 7th century thought about Jerusalem. This gives a lot of credit to the hypothesis of the covenant between God, Abraham, and Ishmael that I just explained. Abraham will raise the temple from its foundation with the help of Ishmael. So now let's look at what happened during the 7th century. I've called this part the forbidding of the forbidden place. Why was the Masjid al-Haram forbidden? Why was it forbidden? And here we have to look into the real historical context of the beginning of the 7th century. You know that there was a great war between the two main superpowers of the area, Byzantium Empire and the Persian Empire. A huge war, equivalent to a world war of the 20th century. And in this context, the Jews from Babylon allied with the Persian and with some Arab troops took Jerusalem in 614. This is a very, very important event that is completely ignored by the standard Islamic narrative. Jerusalem was taken by this alliance, and all the Jews in the Levant, in the area of the Byzantium Empire, revolted against the Byzantium Empire. And it was a great hope for the Jews. It was a project that they worked on very long in Babylon with the exilarch, the king of the Jews in exile. At the time, it was Nehemiah, I think. And they persuaded the Persians to take Jerusalem, and the Persian gave them the ruling over Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem became Jew-ruled during 3 years, from 614 to 617. But the Jews made massacres and took Christians in slavery, and there were many atrocities and horrors. And the Persian feared for the turmoil among the Christians, and they took Jerusalem from the Jews in 617. And so this was the end of this small time of Jew rule on Jerusalem, which is not very known.
And is that the sense of forbidden then? It was forbidden to the Jews.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was. I don't think Jerusalem was forbidden to the Jews before 614.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I'm not. I need some documentation on this. But what I know is that when the Jews took Jerusalem in 614, there were some massive riots from the Christians.
Yeah.
And they at first managed to expel the Jews and the Persians and the Arabs from Jerusalem. And they even killed the exilarch, and they killed the priest. because I think at this time the Jews were had prepared a rebuilding of the temple. Here we have some documentation on this now. You can even find it on the Wikipedia page of the 614 Jerusalem taking, Jerusalem siege, and so on. If you look at the footnotes, there are lots and lots and lots of documentation and material to be read, explaining the Christian riots, the Jewish repression, and the fail of the tentative, the try to rebuild the temple. I think the Pharisees, the Jews from Babylon, had the project to rebuild the temple and to have it serviced again. But it failed. Christians killing the exilarch, killing also the priests that were supposed to perform the sacrifice and so on, and the project failed. And in 617, the Persian took Jerusalem back from and assumed a Persian rule over Jerusalem. So it was the end of this very short rabbinic rule over Jerusalem. We know that there were some Arab soldiers in this alliance. We know this from documentation. And now we can look into the Quranic text and try to make sense of it. Because the Quranic text, as we will see, talks about some events that strangely resemble what I just told you.
Yeah.
In the Surah 8, verse 34, we see that the rabbinic Jew kept out the believers from the forbidden place of worship in Jerusalem. I know those are rabbinic Jews because the KFR root is
Kufar.
Kufar is used here.
Yeah.
In the verse, the prayer of the Kufar at the house is nothing but whistling and clapping of hands. So there was an opposition between rabbinic Jews and believers in Jerusalem. When could have this occurred? Not in 638, when the Arabs took Jerusalem, because there was no rabbinical Jew at the moment. Because if we another point of historical context is that the Byzantium Empire, Emperor Heraclius took Jerusalem back in the 670s, something around 677, I think. And then there was again a Christian rule over Jerusalem, and all the Jews were expelled, and which is understandable due to the atrocities they were responsible of. And the city was forbidden to Jews when the Christian took over at the end of the 620s. So we know that the Jews, which the verse 35 of Surah 8 talks about, are not Jews from 638. They are Jews from before, so maybe 614.
Yeah, 614 sounds right to me.
So if we look now into Surah 2, verse 217, they ask you about the sacred mounts, about fighting during it, but keeping men from the way of God and covering unbelieving him, and the forbidden place of worship and expelling its people from it are even more serious in the sight of God. Persecution, fitna, the opposition, opposition between the same parties, fratricidal opposition, is more serious than killing. And here in Surah 48, verse 25, there are those who covered, they are the rabbinical Jews, and they kept you from the forbidden place of worship, the Masjid Al-Aqsa, no, not Al-Aqsa, Al-Haram, I made a mistake here. It's a Masjid al-Haram. And also the offering, which was prevented from reaching its lawful place, if not for certain believing men and believing women whom did not know, or you would have trampled them or guilt-smitten, we would indeed have punished those among them who covered with a painful punishment. Here we have a story, interesting story. The believers and I think the Nazarenes, the Quranic Nazarenes with them, tried to get to the Temple Mount, to the forbidden place of worship, so the place of the old temple, the old Jewish temple, with cattle, with beasts ready for the sacrifice, the offering.
Yeah.
They were prevented from reaching its lawful place, prevented by those who covered. And so here we see that the rabbinical Jew expelled or blocked the way to the Temple Mount and expelled the believers and the Nazarenes from Jerusalem. This is what is also told, what it is also told in Surah 22, verse 25, 26, as to those who have covered, so the rabbinical Jews, and would keep back from the way of God and from the sacred mosque, so Masjid al-Haram, which we have made to all men, and any whose purpose or in profane wrongdoing, we will cause to taste the most grievous penalty. And whereas we gave to Abraham the site of the house, so here we see that the site of the house is supposed to be given to Abraham, meaning the Nazarenes, and not to the rabbinical Jews. And the rabbinical Jews keep back the believers and the Nazarene from doing what they wanted to do at the Temple Mount, which is rebuilding the temple, or at least performing the sacrifice, having the true religion back in its lawful, back at the temple, back at the Temple Mount. So I don't see any other occasion than the 614 taking of Jerusalem to explain those verses.
Yeah.
And I think those verses tells us a story which we didn't know, the story of the Nazarenes and the believer being part of the alliance with the Jews, the Persians, and some other Arabs for the taking of Jerusalem. They tried to achieve their own goals within the alliance. They knew that the Jews wanted to rebuild the temple, but they wanted to be faster than them and to get to the Temple Mount before the rabbinical Jews, but they were kept out and they were expelled.
Can I just point out something that, if this interpretation is true, which I believe it is, then that would suggest that some of the writings in the Quran are contemporary with that period, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense for them to write this material down.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Contemporary, or they could have been composed or written 1 or 2 or 5 years later.
Yeah.
But
it mostly makes sense
that the Quran
at the
is
time.
A very old witness. We have to be careful there, because the Quran is a text which has also been manipulated.
Yeah.
But we can get from the context, from the sense of what we are reading, that I think we are right.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an hypothesis. It is not as strong as the understanding that we now have of the forbidden place of worship and the temple being, and the standing place of Abraham being all in Jerusalem. I think, for example, those items are very, very well established now. Here, with the forbidding of the forbidden place, It's an hypothesis. There are some other verses in the Quran, but I could not having them all fit in the presentation.
Yeah.
But what we know now is that the way of God has become hindered by the kuffars, by the unbelievers, by those who covers, namely the rabbinical Jews.
Yeah. They're ruining the party. They're spoiling the plans of the Nazarenes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're ruining the party, and an event very important has occurred, the expulsion.
Yeah.
The expulsion of the believers from Jerusalem. And this topic, this topoi of the expulsion is very, very, very important. We see that standard Islamic narrative has invented the expulsion of Muhammad from Mecca.
Yeah.
Due to unbelievers.
Ah, yes. It is a very strong parallel with the rabbinical Jews and the Nazarenes there.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Makes sense.
But is this the Hijra? I haven't time enough here. There is not enough time now to speak about the Hijra.
Maybe for
another time, because I think it's the Hijra is part of this story, this 614 expulsion of the Arabs from Jerusalem, but it's also bigger than that. And also we could see it by reading the Quran.
Yeah.
So this was about the forbidding of the forbidden place. And what took place thereafter? I've got a small conclusion here. Jews hindered the Arab and the Nazarene from accessing Temple Mount and performing something there. The something we know it's about performing the sacrifices and maybe rebuilding the temple. But this happened thereafter. The grand venture happened. The Hajj and the Umrah were performed. Finally, eventually, the Arabs, the believers, and the Nazarene took Jerusalem at the end of the 630s. We don't know the exact date, something between 636, 638, but they took Jerusalem. There was an agreement with the Christian ruler of Jerusalem at the time, which was Bishop Sophron in Jerusalem, and he opened the doors without violence. And the believers, we have some sources telling the story. The believers the Arabs were guided by people who were described as Jews by some witnesses, and they went to the Temple Mount and they rebuilt the temple. We know it happened. So we can guess it from the Quranic text, but it is not really explicit in it. But we have very, very strong clues or hints in the Quranic text. At first, we see that some of the preaching from the preachers that we found in the Quranic text are about proclaiming the Hajj, completing the Hajj and the visitation. So going to Jerusalem, we have to go to Jerusalem. We have to make the Hajj. And since the Hajj was forbidden, it is not a common thing. It is they have to make the first Hajj, the new Hajj. So when we see Hajj in the Quranic text, it's all about conquering Jerusalem. It's a kind of a fight in the way of God, because the doors are closed. Jerusalem is under the Byzantium rule, and it will not be easy. But they achieved it anyway. And they made a covenant with the Christian ruling over Jerusalem. In this, we see it in the Quranic text, in Surah 9, verse 7. How can there be for the Christians a covenant with God and with his apostle, except those with whom you made a covenant near the sacred mosque, so in Jerusalem? So long as they are upright to you, then you be upright to them. So, at a time, there was a covenant, there was a treaty made between the believers, at least the believers who composed the names of the Surah 9, and the Christian. And when we look at what happened during the 7th century, I don't think it could have happened before 614, during before the city fell to Jewish rule. It could have happened. It could only have happened when the city was taken around 638, and the covenant, the treaty that we see here, must be the treaty that was made with Bishop Sophronius, which opened the door to the city and to the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
So we don't have explicit mention of the rebuilding of the temple in the Quran, but here in Surah 9 also, verse 107, there is something strange about a mosque, a masjid that has been built. So it's not the Masjid al-Haram, but it's a masjid that caused division among the believers. And one could assume, it's an hypothesis, that it was the building that was built on the Temple Mount when the Arabs took the city, and that something happened that spread division among the believers, and that they opposed one another. Some were partisans of this new mosque, some were opposed at what happened in it. It's a mosque, a masjid, where prayer is to be performed, and the standing prayer. And it is here, I have pointed the stand word in blue, because it is the same root as the standing place of Abraham and so on. So maybe it's in Jerusalem, maybe it's the building that has been built on the Temple Mount. And maybe here we have an account of the opposition and the beginning of the fitna between the different Arab factions, the different Arab parties. My hypothesis is that the temple was rebuilt. They were waiting for the apocalypse, and the apocalypse did not come. Something went wrong. Jesus did not come back, and the Arabs, the believers, started to fight among themselves, and the alliance, the covenant between the believers and the Nazarene was shattered.
Yeah.
And here we have a verse that we already saw in the previous presentation. It's the verse 14 of Surah 5, which tells us about the covenant that existed between the Nazarenes and the believers, and that the covenant is no more. We made a covenant. So here it's God who is supposed to be speaking. And but we see that the covenant was a tripartite covenant. It was God plus Abraham, Ishmael. So God has something to he has a say in the covenant. And here, but the covenant is no more because the Nazarene neglected a portion of what they were reminded of. So they were not the good guides they were supposed to be for the Arabs. So here, I think it's almost done for the Nazarene reading of the Quran, at least for those presentations. There are lots of other stuff to be studied and said, of course. But here, for what I wanted to present you, I think this is it. Let's jump to conclusion. The Quranic text tells the story of an alliance between some Nazarenes, Judeo-Nazarenes, and some Arabs, the believer, al-Muminun. One understands then that the Quran is not about Islam or its revelation. This is very important to understand. One understands then that the Quran is not about Islam or its revelation. It is not even an Islamic text. The Quran is a pre-Islamic text that the standard Islamic narrative has forced into an Islamic understanding. This is why we have two stories. There is the standard Islamic narrative, and underneath there is the from them.
It's
lots
the
of questions to be asked and answered. What happened exactly at the Temple Mount? What can we make out? All the other material. Here we mostly look at the Quranic text, but we also took into account a bit of the Islamic tradition, some real historical context, and so on. But there is now a lot of new sources, new evidence, new artifacts, coins, buildings that are found, and lots to be learned thanks to this new material. And with this, we could engage in an historical critical approach, which is to compare the result of the studies in one field with another field. For example, the Quranic text with the coins, the Quranic text with the buildings, the Quranic text with the Coptic material, the Quranic text with the Jewish traditions, and so on. And
it seems to me that today, really, you've revealed a large part of the Northern historical story, the NHS, as I've referred to it before. So this is what happened originally, and then the standard Islamic narrative was placed on top of it, and that's been the...
I think so, because you see, I can spoil the subject. There is no spoiler warning here. I've done the research, I've done the study. Here we are talking about the Quranic text, but in my book, The Great Secret of Islam, I've done a synthesis of many studies, and studies on the Quranic text, but also studies on all this other material. And it all converges toward this story that we are telling now, the story of this alliance between Nazarenes and the believers. It converges, really, and it's really impressive to see that all the material converge in this direction. But this is only the beginning of Islam. This is not Islam yet. And the story has many developments thereafter. Because here we are in the year 640, but Islam is yet to be done. Islam is yet to be invented. The standard Islamic narrative is not written yet. We have to wait centuries. What happened during the centuries? Why was the memory of the Nazarene erased? What happened? And here we have some theories, some hypotheses, and some very strong facts, very strong ideas which are backed with evidence to explain how Islam was formed, how Islam was invented by the Arab rulers, the first Arab leaders, then the caliphs, starting with Abdul Malik. I've done a lot of presentation on these topics in French. I've got a lot of material on it. I've worked a lot with coins. The coins are very, very interesting.
Yeah.
They show us, for example, how the Arab rulers, I think the first Arab rulers were not caliphs. This is why I don't want to say caliphs.
Yeah, I'd
I
agree
think the
with you.
first caliph was Abdul Malik, and the people before him were not caliphs. But we see how on their coins they printed the symbolic of their power, and we see how this power rises to the caliph power, to Abdul Malik power. And here with Abdul Malik, we have something very new. We have a caliph, which means a lieutenant of God on earth. We see this on his coins. And for the first time, we have someone who pretends to be the Messiah,
Yeah.
pretends to rule with messianic powers. Oh, so here we talked a lot about what happened during the beginning of the 7th century, but a lot happened thereafter.
Yeah, yeah. That's probably best for another day.
That's for another day, maybe another trimester.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Odon. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm sure
Thank you, Mel. Thank you a lot.
And I really appreciate all the contributions you've made in the previous episodes as well. You've really kind of opened our eyes to a totally new aspect to Islamic origins, So
thanks, Mel. Thanks.
and
I would just want to add that the English translation of my book, the Great Secret of Islam, is almost done.
Fantastic.
I'm working on it, and I think it will be available within a month. Well,
Excellent.
depending on when you release the video, Mel.
Yeah.
I think it will be available at the end of June, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think this video will probably be, released a week from when we're recording, so probably by the end of the first week of June. So we probably will expect to see your book 3 weeks from the release of this video. No pressure.
Thanks a lot, Mel.
Thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you again after the summer. No, you can stop. You can stop recording there. Have you stopped?
Yes, let's stop it. Okay.
My computer